Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today's episode 27, China's trade dominance and India's struggle in a losing battle with Mr. Mehta. Mr. Mehta is a senior at Eklavya School, Ahmedabad in Gujarat, India. He's a very talented individual that I met over the summer. He's very much interested in the field of political and economical matters. And he's also a very good investor when it comes to stock, trading, ETFs and everything. And it's my belief that he, in the future, 20, 30 years from now, he will be known as the Warren Buffett of India. That's my belief, and I think it's a belief that's gonna it's a future forecast that's gonna turn out to be true. And we're very glad to have Mr. Mehta with us here into this podcast. Mr. Mehta, is there anything that you would like to add to the introduction?
Thank you very much, Araf, for the introduction. Araf is also a great guy. I mean, his knowledge about finance, especially monetary finance and currency, is really good. And he's gonna be the Warren Buffett of Bangladesh when I'm the Warren Buffett of India.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. I really appreciate it. And let's hope that we both can be the Warren Buffetts of our country. Now, let's get into our discussion. China's trade dominance, India's struggle in a losing battle. To start off, let's start by talking about the economies of China and India. China and India are probably the powerhouses of the world. They're two of the largest economies in the entire world. They have two of the largest population in the entire world and have significant trade relations with each other as well as with other global markets. And both countries are obviously major players in global trade, but they have distinct economic structures, trade partners, and areas of specialization. And for example, as for China, China is the world's largest exporter, and I think it's the second largest importer. In fact, in 2022, they exported around $3.6 trillion and imported around $2.7 trillion. And their major export categories include electronics, machinery, textiles, and chemicals. And their key trading partners include US, the ASEAN nations, which include Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, European Union, Japan, and South Korea. On the other hand, India is also one of the fastest growing large economies with a diverse trade portfolio. They exported in 2022 around $447 billion and imported around $723 billion. And their major export categories include pharmaceuticals, and I'm sure most of you have heard Indian pharmaceutical companies during the COVID-19 pandemic, textiles, jewelry, IT services, petroleum products, and chemicals. And their key trading partners include the US, UAE, European Union, China, and also ASEAN countries. And China and India also have a lot of bilateral trade with each other. Their trade reached a record high of around $136 billion. And China's export to India is around $119 billion, I believe. And India's exports to China is around $18 billion. And we see a little imbalance here because China exports a lot to India, then India exports to China. And India also has a significant trade deficit with China amounting to around $100 billion in 2022. As for the key exports from China to India, it includes electrical machinery and equipment, organic chemicals, plastic and plastic articles, medical equipment, and supplies. And the key exports from India to China is iron ore, cotton and yen, organic chemicals, fish, seafood, and agricultural products. And the major sectors of trade between India and China include technology and electronics. Electronics and tech products represent a major portion of China's exports. And China is the world's largest supplier of smartphones, computers, and telecommunication equipment. And China's dominance in manufacturing is also driven by electronics, textile, and machinery. And they have a low labor cost, robust supply chains, and technological advancement, which help maintain its competitive edge. And China also imports a lot of raw materials like crude oil, iron ore, and copper, especially from countries like Australia, Brazil, and the Middle East. And the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, of China has been a major cornerstone of China's foreign policy and trade expansion, helping it build infrastructure and trade ties across Asia, Africa, and Europe. As for India, India is one of the world's largest producers of generic medicines. Pharmaceuticals are a significant export category, particularly to the US, Europe, and Africa. And India is also a global leader in IT and outsourcing services, driven by companies such as Wipro And India also exports a wide range of agriculture products like rice, wheat, and sugar. And however, India is also a large importer of edible oils, pulses, and other food products. And the major sector for India includes the garment sector, such as the export of cotton garments and home textiles. And India has traditionally been one of the largest textile exporters, but faces competition from countries like Bangladesh and China. And there are also a lot of challenges and opportunities for both the countries. For example, for China, there is a lot of tension, geopolitical tension, to be specific. Trade wars, particularly with the U.S., have impacted Chinese exports. The tariffs imposed during the U.S.-China trade war continue to be a point of contention. And there's also a lot of increasing tensions with Western countries over technology transfers and trade practices. And there's also a lot of supply chain shifts. For example, post COVID, there's a trend of diversification of supply chains as companies are wishing to see reduce dependence on China. Countries like Vietnam and India are potential beneficiaries of this shift. And we have seen like Apple is shifting towards India now, more and now in the near future. And there's also a lot of decarbonization, which plays a lot of factors in China. China is working towards lowering its carbon emissions, which could impact industries like steel, cement, and the coal that are key to its export economy. As for trade deficit, it remains one of the main concerns and challenges of India. India has persistent trade deficits with many of its major trading partners, particularly China. Balancing imports and exports remains a significant challenge, and India's Make in India campaign has aimed at boosting manufacturing and reducing its dependence on imported goods. And infrastructure challenges like logistics costs, inefficiencies at ports, and transportation need to be addressed to become a major competitive exporter. So, my question, or are there any more information or any opinions that you would like to add to the things that I've just said, Mr. Mehta, Arif Malik, or Shazib Karim? And what do you think are the challenges and opportunities facing both of these nations before we talk a little bit about their trade dominances and the struggles that both of these countries are facing and in maintaining their trade dominances over each other?
Yeah, so Araf, you gave a pretty good outline of the problem. China has like a very strong global position, especially when it comes to the new market products such as semiconductors, electronics. It controls like all the major trading nodes, especially when it comes to such products. So the main thing is like China has a really dominant position when it comes to exports. Moreover, China has a large population, and if you see, India has a larger population, but like 48% of the Indian population that's occupied in agriculture, and agriculture contributes to only like 15% of our economic output, whereas like in China, around 30% of the population is into manufactured and allied activities, and they contribute to like around 35 to 40% of the output. But as you can see, like in the recent years, China has been experiencing diminishing returns to scale. You can see like seeing the current recession that's going on and the economic stimuli that has to be given to the country. China is like facing a threat to its dominant position, mainly because India is experiencing increasing returns to scale. If you see over the past few years, the share of the agriculture sector has decreased and manufacturing in India has increased multifold. Western countries, they have been increasing their import from India, and many companies are taking advantage of this. For example, if you see Foxconn is a major Taiwanese company involved in semiconductors, and like before, all of its plants were in China, but Foxconn is like one of the biggest FDI investors in India currently because of this geopolitical shift that's happening, the tense geopolitical situation. So India is definitely going to benefit from that. Moreover, India has a large youth population, as you guys know, and China is facing the aging problem. They had to remove like the one child limit to like the two child limit. So we can definitely leverage this youth population in the future in maybe in all the labor intensive exercises. For example, IT is really labor intensive when it comes to back office work, and we have been taking advantage of this over the years. So as you can see, we really have a competitive edge in IT over China, and instead of leveraging it in rare earth metals or some other places where China is really powerful, like intrinsic manufacturing. We can aim at IT and IT related sectors in order to increase our exports and use it as a geopolitical leverage over China.
Shazib, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. Arfan, first of all, I'd say to him, I'd fully agree with you, and Arfan, I would also fully agree with the insights you were providing us with beforehand. And I think to add my own personal insights and my personal opinion, I'd say we can start by looking at China's dominant position in global trade, as over the last few decades, China has rapidly transformed into the world's factory. A combination of low labor costs, efficient infrastructure, and strong government support has enabled the country to dominate industries ranging from electronics to textiles and heavy machinery. And by 2023, China accounted for nearly 15% of global exports, and its trade routes span across Asia, Africa, and Europe through its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. And China's dominance isn't just about sheer volume of trade, it's about controlling supply chains in critical sectors like semiconductors, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. And China not only manufactures products but also controls the raw materials and components that other countries, including India, rely on. So now let's turn to India. On paper, India has some significant advantages. Its labor force is young, growing, and often more affordable than China's increasingly expensive workforce. And with initiatives like Make in India, launched in 2014, the government aimed to boost domestic manufacturing and turn India to a global manufacturing hub. But despite these efforts, India's manufacturing sector still accounts for just about 15% of its GDP, compared to China's 28%. And the challenges India faces are deep rooted. First and foremost, it's the infrastructure. China's efficient ports, highways, and logistics networks have given it a global advantage in export markets. In contrast, India's infrastructure has long been a bottleneck for its manufacturing ambitions. And and also, I'd say that one of the key challenges for India is its inability to scale production at the same level as China. While sectors like IT services have flourished, manufacturing in India still remains fragmented, with small and medium-sized enterprises struggling to scale up due to limited access to capital and outdated technologies. And also, Araf, you were also asked us to add some information on the challenges that they face, and I think, in my opinion, like if you look at some shared challenges for both countries, I'd say that both China and India rely heavily on fossil fuels, which make them vulnerable to fluctuations in global energy markets. Additionally, both countries face international pressure to adapt cleaner energy and meet global climate change goals, requiring huge investments in renewable energy infrastructure. And while both China and India are making strides in technology, they face challenges in innovation. China, despite its growth in tech, relies heavily on foreign technologies, like semiconductors, for example. And India, while strong in IT services, is lagging in high tech manufacturing and innovation ecosystems compared to countries like China or the US. And also, economic growth in both China and India has been accompanied by rising income inequality. In China, rapid urbanization has led to widening wealth gap, while in India, the rural-urban divide and caste-based disparities continue to pose significant challenges to inclusive growth. And I'd say that both China and India are navigating global shifts in trade, especially in the face of a more protectionist world. Countries are diversifying supply chains post-pandemic, and the growing importance of sustainability in trade is putting pressure on traditional manufacturing models.
Yeah, I would agree with Shazib and him, and I'll also like to comment on the trade deficit and the structural dependence of India and China. So, like in 2022, India's trade deficit with China exceeded over $80 billion, which to me is a clear indication of its heavy reliance on the Chinese imports for a wide range of products, including consumer electronics, pharmaceuticals, and the capital goods. And this trade imbalance can be analyzed through the lens of comparative advantage, which postulates that countries should specialize in producing goods where they have relative efficiency. And China has developed a comparative advantage in manufacturing, particularly in high tech industries such as electronics, telecommunications, and machinery. And this is largely due to its early and strategic investments in infrastructure, human capital, which has allowed it to dominate the global supply chains. But I would say India, on the other hand, as of today, has struggled to develop a competitive manufacturing sector in high end services. Its competitive advantage lies in its services sector, particularly in business process outsourcing, which is led by companies such as the Tata Consultancy Services, Wipro, and Infosys. And however, while these industries contribute to significantly towards the Indian GDP, I would say they do not generate the same level of broad-based economic development as manufacturing does in China. And we have to understand also that manufacturing has a higher multiplier effect, which is the ability of a sector to stimulate economic growth across other sectors, such as transportation, energy, and logistics. And I would say the multiplier effect for manufacturing is more prominent in China compared to India. And also, I'd like to comment a little bit on the manufacturing disparity as well. So, like China is often referred to as the world's factory because of the global manufacturing output. China, if I'm not mistaken, it's like more than 1/4 of the global manufacturing output it can be attributed to China, while India's one is around 3 to 5%, I would say. So the success of the Chinese manufacturing therefore can be attributed to the highly skilled labor force and the government policies that support the industrial development. And I would say like countries like not countries, I mean, like companies, looking at companies alone, like companies like Apple, Dell, HP, Foxconn, all of it have like huge factories in China where they manufacture their products. For example, Foxconn factories in Shenzhen, I believe, is often referred to the iPhone city because its capability of producing thousands of smartphones daily, which shows China's unmatched production capacity. And I would say India, on the other hand, has not necessarily struggled, but I would say India's manufacturing is more on the lower on the lower skilled sectors such as garments. But however, also not only that, there has been some initiatives in India. It's not that India hasn't done any initiatives. India has done Made in India, which was launched in 2014, which aims to encourage the domestic and foreign investments in manufacturing. However, I would say several factors have hindered its success. For example, labor inefficiency, lack of an educated workforce, and like complex I mean like systemic challenges, basically like corruption and such. So I would say while FDI has reached a record of like around $80 billion in the fiscal year 2020 to 2021, I would say it still falls short of the scale needed to challenge China. So I would say like China's advantage lies in the fact that its labor force is very skilled, and that the government has basically created a system where the foreign investors feel somewhat confident to invest in China and work with Chinese outsourcing companies.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your invaluable opinions, and I agree with everything that has been said. And before we talk about a little bit about how India can catch up with China's trade dominance, I think it's first important to understand what is China's trade dominance. And so, to begin, China is, again, some of you have already mentioned, is the world's largest exporter, accounting for 30% of the global exports in 2022, with exports valued at around $3.6 trillion. And China's diversified export base spans sectors like electronics, machinery, textiles, and chemicals, giving it a commanding position in various global supply chains. And China has also earned the nickname, which I am sure that everyone is aware of, factory of the world, due to its vast and highly efficient manufacturing system. And China's large-scale capabilities allow it to keep its costs low, ensuring competitiveness across industries. And there are a lot of what I've realized in China is that there are a lot of well-industrialized cities, like special economic zones in China, like Shenzhen, which is known for technology, Dongguan, which is known for manufacturing, Suzhou, which is known for machinery, which provide robust supply chain and logistic advantages. And China has also a lot of world class infrastructure, including ports, highways, railways, airports, which facilitate efficient and large scale exports. And there's also a lot of investments in projects like the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), which further boost China's global trade influence by improving connectivity with Asia, Europe, and Africa. And China is also pushing towards high-tech manufacturing, semiconductors, 5G, intelligence, which strengthens its competitive edge in industries critical to future trade growth. And companies like Huawei, Xiaomi, and Alibaba have become leaders in the tech and digital sectors, driving the export of electronic goods and digital services. And there's also a lot of government support when it comes to China. China's government actively supports trade and export sectors through subsidies, low-interest loans, and favorable policies for exporters. And there's also a lot of state-owned enterprises (SOEs) which dominate many strategic sectors, allowing China to control key industries and set export pricing trends globally. And China also has historically benefited from a large, cost-effective labor force, although wages have risen in recent years, and automation and advanced manufacturing have offset rising labor costs, allowing China to maintain its competitiveness. So, my question to all of you, and you can also add your opinions and add any new information to the things that I've said, is what are the advantages? Like, what makes China China? What makes it dominate the world trade? This question applies to anyone, Mr. Mehta, Arif Malik, or Shazib Karim.
Thank you, Araf. So I would like to say that China's dominance is partly due to its well-established industrial clusters and supplier networks that drastically reduce the production and the transportation cost. For example, in China, it takes the same amount of time to get from Beijing to Lhasa as it takes in India from Mumbai to Delhi. And meanwhile, these well-established industrial clusters, they act as hub. For example, Shenzhen acts as an electronics hub and provides a one-stop shop for all parts of the supply chain, which drives efficiency. India's manufacturing hubs are more scattered and the suppliers are not as interconnected. For example, production may take place in Himachal Pradesh and distribution may take place through a depot in Surat. This fragmented ecosystem makes it harder for India to achieve the efficiencies that China has developed over the years. Moreover, while China is investing heavily in robotics, AI, and other manufacturing technologies, India's manufacturing sector has been slow to adopt these innovations, which can be clearly seen as we are still focusing on labor-intensive techniques, especially in the cloth market, where we can diversify into more technologically intensive techniques in order to increase the marginal revenue product of the labor. Also, China has countered India's Make in India by Made in China 2025, a plan to upgrade its industries with advanced technologies. This puts it ahead in areas like electronics and automotive manufacturing. In contrast, India's digital transformation in the manufacturing sector is still lagging. So what this technological gap does is it limits India's competitiveness in producing high-tech and technologically intrinsic goods, which are becoming a larger part of the global trade. Also, many Indian manufacturers, they focus on serving the domestic market rather than focusing on exports. This is also partly due to government policies, tariffs, and price ceilings. The inward focus of the Indian government as well as the Indian companies prevents them from scaling to the level of global competitiveness that China's export-oriented industries have achieved. Therefore, you can clearly see in major lists such as the Fortune 500 and the Forbes Global 2000, China and Chinese companies far outpace Indian companies. Without a strong export focus, Indian industries miss out on the opportunities that the global markets present, while China's export-driven growth has allowed it to become a dominant player.
Arif, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sorry, my mic wasn't turning on. So yeah, I would completely agree with him, and also I would like to talk about the fact that like basically I would like to talk about what the Chinese government is doing that the Indian government isn't currently doing, which is helping the Chinese, which is basically helping China to prosper. So firstly, I would like to say that the Chinese government practices state-led capitalism, where the state plays an active role in directing the economy, and through large state-owned enterprises and direct intervention in key sectors, China can mobilize resources at a massive scale and direct capital where it is needed to fulfill the goals. For example, the China Baowu Steel Group or the China National Petroleum Corporation and Hawaii benefit from direct government support in terms of subsidies, cheap credit, labor help as well, and regulatory preferences. And this centralized approach allows China to strategically develop industries which are crucial for global competitiveness. However, I would say India's economy is largely driven by private enterprises, where we can see conglomerates like the Tatas or even Reliance dominate the industry, where there is limited government control over the private industries. And I would say the Indian government does offer industrial incentives such as the product linked incentive PLI schemes, which promote domestic manufacturing. But these are more market driven and less centralized compared to China's top down industrial policies. And I would say, furthermore, India's private sector is more burdened by the bureaucratic red tape, the inconsistent regulations, and I would say overall we have to understand the market is India is more domestic focused, but the market in China is more internationally focused. And other than that, I would also like to say that the some of the initiative that the Chinese government is doing, particularly in regards to I would say transportation and like overall trade, would be the Belt and Road initiative that the Chinese government has employed. And we have to understand that the Belt and Road initiatives is like a multi-trillion-dollar project, and it has expanded China's influence across like over 100 countries with strategic investments in ports like Gwandar in Pakistan, the Piraeus in Greece. And we have to understand that the Belt and Road initiatives is more than an open border corridor for China and its allies. It's basically allowing China to distribute its goods effectively. It's allowing China to distribute its goods more efficiently, and it's also allowing China to be a key player in the global economy. And not only the Belt and Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the CPEC, is also like helping China to gain routes to South Asia and Middle East. So I would say one thing that makes China Araf is that the government is really smart, and the government knows what they're doing, and the government is basically promoting state-led capitalism, where the government is offering large corporations as much resources as they need, and they also are like promoting up and like politically also like cooperating with other countries to make sure that they can distribute the goods more efficiently, which basically allows China to be basically the world's largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity.
Yeah, Arif, I'd fully agree with you, and I think I'd also agree with you, Hem. And Arif, to answer your question and my personal opinion, and to just answer why China is so dominant. Like, we know how powerful China is in today's world. As you know, it's literally a global hegemon. But I think this is due to like several factors, and one of them is due to their sheer size. Like, as we know, China has the world's largest population with over 1.4 billion people, and this provides a massive labor force and a significant domestic consumer market. And the ability to mobilize such a large population for industrial and economic purposes is a huge factor in China's dominance, particularly in manufacturing and production. And it's because historically, China has had an abundance of low-cost labor, which allowed it to become the world's factory. While wages have risen in recent years, China's workforce still remains a key competitive advantage in terms of both scale and skill in industrial and tech sectors. And there's another factor, like we can also look at their strategic state-led economic planning. Like, for example, China's economic model is often described as state capitalism, where the government plays a central role in directing economic activity. And the Chinese Communist Party controls key sectors of the economy and uses a top-down approach to implement long-term development plans. And policies are aligned to promote industrialization, infrastructure growth, and technological advancement. And China's centrally planned economy uses 5 year plans to strategically direct economic priorities. And these plans have guided the country's economic transformation, focusing on building infrastructure, fostering innovation, and creating global competitiveness in sectors like technology, green energy, and manufacturing. And also it's because of their technology and innovation as well. As we know, China has made significant strides in technology and innovation in recent years. Companies like Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, and DJI are not only dominant in China but also compete globally in sectors like telecommunications, e-commerce, artificial intelligence, and fintech. And China spends vast amounts on R&D, aiming to transition from being primarily a manufacturer to becoming a leader in technology and innovation. And it is heavily investing in AI, 5G, green technology, and semiconductors as it seeks to reduce reliance on foreign technology and become self-sufficient in critical industries. And we can also look at China's digital ecosystem. China's dominance in the digital economy is also growing, with companies like Alibaba and Tencent reshaping industries from e-commerce to digital payments. And the Chinese tech sector's integration into everyday life through platforms like WeChat and Alipay shows the scale of innovation of its digital ecosystem.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta, Arif Malik, and Shazib Karim for your invaluable opinions. And now talking a little bit about India and India's struggle with trade, increasing the trade. First of all, India has done a lot to increase its trade outflows to other countries in the world, but it can do more to outpace China, not outpace China, but to reach China's level, and even in the future may even outpace them. We don't know what the future is going to be like, but we can see and try to predict it. So India has a significant trade balance with China, which reached an alarming the $100 billion in 2022, and imports from China far exceed exports, with India heavily dependent on Chinese products like electronics, machinery, chemicals, and manufacturing equipment. And despite the Modi government's Make in India campaign, India's manufacturing sector has struggled to keep up with China, and this is mainly because of India's fragmented manufacturing base that lacks the economics of scale that China enjoys. And I believe that Mr. Mehta has mentioned it, that China has it's you can call it, the country is specialized, each city is specialized in some way, and India lacks that specialization. It has some specialization. For example, when we think of Bengaluru, we think of tech, but it's not that to level of China, for example. And India also has higher costs due to inefficiency in labor laws, complex land acquisition processes, and a higher logistics cost, and weak industrial infrastructure compared to China's advanced industrial clusters. And India's infrastructure is relatively underdeveloped, attracting the competitiveness of its exports. And India's logistics costs are also among the highest in the world, accounting for around 14% of GDP compared to China's 8%. And there's also a lot of port congestion, inadequate road networks, and delays in customs that hinder China's trade efficiency. And there's a lot of poor supply chain integration in India that limits India's ability to produce value products at a competitive scale. And India has not yet fully transitioned to a high tech manufacturing, and still relies on low value exports such as textiles and raw materials, as Hemmet has highlighted. And China's dominance in the tech sector, smartphones and semiconductors and electric vehicles, gives it a significant trade advantage. And India lags in areas like artificial intelligence, robotics, and electronics, where China has invested heavily. And India's share of global markets is less than 2%, significantly lower than China's 13%. And India's export at $447 billion in 2022 are a fraction of China's export volume, reflecting India's limited presence in global markets. And India has also a lot of dependence on imports. For example, India is highly dependent on imports of intermediate goods and raw materials, particularly from China, to fuel its domestic industries. And critical sectors like electronics, pharmaceuticals, and automobile components are relying on Chinese exports, limiting India's ability to reduce its trade deficit. And the final point that I would like to talk a little bit about, which is less based on statistics but more based on my personal opinion and what I've observed, is that the bureaucratic and regulatory hurdles in India, for example, India's complex regulatory environment with heavy bureaucracy and lengthy approval processes has deterred foreign investment and stifled trade growth. And India has made progress in the ease of doing business, but the business environment is still perceived as less favorable than China's, particularly for large-scale manufacturing. And I believe there's also a lot of cultural impacts that have are playing a role. For example, when you go to China, the Chinese laws attract foreigners because they are more relaxed towards foreigners than towards Chinese citizens. But in India, the laws are, you can say, are more strict, not way more stricter, but I think to some extent are more stricter towards foreigners than they are to Indians. But in China, it's the exact opposite. They're more relaxed towards foreigners because they want people to come and build things in their country. And I've also seen a lot of differences where talents are applied in India and China, and I believe that Mr. Mehta would agree with me. Basically, this is a realization that I got after I watched the film 12 Fail, where a lot of brilliant and talented individuals who are going to engineering schools such as IIT India. IIT is probably harder to get in than MIT. They are going to industries such as government sectors. They're applying for jobs in the government, bureaucratic jobs. And yes, it's important to have smart people in the bureaucracy, but it's also better to have smart people working as engineers and building the country. So I believe that China is putting its smart people towards building the country, while India is putting its smart people towards bureaucracy. And obviously, bureaucracy, you need a strong bureaucratic structure in a country. You need a powerful bureaucracy to control the country and make sure it's good. But if all the smart engineers, if all the smart people want to get a bureaucratic job, then you wouldn't have enough engineers in the country to work in the engineering sectors and other things. That's my personal opinion. But Mr. Mehta, if you want to chime in and add anything, I would be grateful for that. And are there any more information or any new information or any opinions that you would like to add to the things that I've just said, Mr. Mehta, Aib Malik, or Shazib Karim?
Yeah, I agree with you, Araf. India faces a significant problem with the quality of graduates entering the job market. Many of these IITians look for security and therefore turn to the bureaucracy, to the IAS and the Indian Foreign Service. So if like there are 1,000 IIT grads, around 300 or 400 of them will join the Indian Administrative Service. Another problem that India faces currently is brain drain. So despite being one of the world's fastest growing economies, India still faces limitations offered to high quality employment people, especially in sectors like research, science, and high tech industries. Many skilled professionals seek opportunities abroad where they are more likely to find well paid, high impact roles. For example, many Indian IT professionals, engineers, and scientists, the top guys from the IITs and the NITs, they often move to countries like the United States, where tech giants such as Google, Microsoft, and Amazon offer better job prospects, higher salaries, and advanced research opportunities. Also, Indian institutions lack cutting-edge facilities for research, innovation, and technological development. This is not the case in China, where you can find the creme de la creme of the tech world at institutes such as Tsinghua or Peking. Every year, thousands of Indians enroll in STEM programs at universities like MIT, Stanford, and Oxford, whereas in China, most of the students give the Gaokao and go for the top universities in their own nation, and therefore there's a retainment of talent. Also, India has a significantly low standard of living, and as a result, this is a deterrent to many smart people, the creme de la creme of the Indian society. These factors play a significant role in convincing Indian professionals to emigrate. Meanwhile, in China, where there's a significantly higher standard of living and also a low cost of living compared to countries such as countries of Western Europe and North America, the people choose to stay there over emigrating to newer countries. Indian doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs often choose to settle in US, Canada, or Europe due to the better healthcare system, cleaner environments, and overall better quality of life. China also faced the same problem in the past, but after Deng Xiaoping took over and with the economic liberalization over the years, China has seen sufficient brain gain or reverse brain drain, if you may say. Many Chinese people who once emigrated under Mao's rule have returned back, set up companies in their home countries. This has been happening in India, but as you can clearly see, it's not the state of China. It's much low.
Mr. Shazib Karim, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Araf. And I think I'd agree with you, him, and I'd also agree with what you were saying, Araf. But I think, in my opinion, India if you look at India, the India's supply chain and logistics are crucial in my opinion. Like if like for example, India's logistics sector has seen rapid growth driven by the rise of e-commerce and improved road connectivity. And the implementation of goods and services tax in 2017 has also helped streamline logistics, reducing the number of checkpoints and delays in interstate transport. But however, logistics costs in India remain high, like around 13 to 14% of GDP, compared to 8 to 10% in developed countries like the US and China. And the inefficiency stems from fragmentation in the logistics sector, poor infrastructure in some regions, and a lack of warehousing and cold storage facilities. And these issues increase transportation costs and reduce competitiveness. And some ongoing efforts, like the Indian government has launched the National Logistics Policy to reduce the costs of logistics, improve last mile connectivity, and ensure the integration of different modes of transport. And this includes initiatives like developing multi-modal logistics parks, better warehousing facilities, and adopting technology for logistics management. And I think also, in my opinion, China, I'm sorry, we're talking about India. I think India's power and energy infrastructure as well is also vital. Like for example, India has significantly improved its power infrastructure over the last few decades. Like the country now ranks third in terms of electricity generation globally, with a strong focus on renewable energy. And India has one of the most ambitious solar energy programs in the world, aiming to generate 175 uh, grams per watt of renewable energy by 2022. But however, power outages remain common in many parts of the country, particularly in rural and semi-urban areas. Additionally, the transmission and distribution network is plagued by losses due to inefficiency and theft, leading to significant financial losses for power companies. And India is working on improving the transmission infrastructure and reducing distribution losses. Like projects like Power for All and Smart Grid initiatives aim to ensure consistent and reliable electricity supply across the country.
Yeah, I would agree with Shazib, and I would also like to talk about some of the social factors that might influence China and India. So I would say, in terms of government control, I would say there's a stark difference between China and India. In China, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, plays a significant role in many aspects of the everyday life, and the government exercises control over the media, internet, education, basically all aspects of your life. Basically the CCP is watching you everywhere you go, and this is evident through the heavily surveillance infrastructure that China has, and the social credit system, which rewards or punishes citizens based on their compliance with the government defined norms. And this system also impacts personal interactions, and even personal interactions. Social media platforms like WeChat, for example, is heavily monitored, and free speech is essentially derailed, which creates a controlled public space where dissent or criticism of the government is limited. I would say, in contrast, India, which is the world's largest democracy, provides its citizens, I would say, with more freedom in speech, expression, and social behavior. And while India faces problems with censorship, such as restriction on films or internet shutdowns during unrest, I would say these incidents are not as systemic as in China. And political unrest protests are seen in India, such as the farmers' protest in 2020, 2021, or the anti-CAA protest in 2019. But I would say India overall is way better than China in terms of letting citizens freely express themselves. And I would say this has actually led to more of an entrepreneurial spirit in India, because people are more willing to take risk, and people are more willing to they're not afraid to do undertake activities. And this is evident by tech hubs like in Bangalore, for example. And I would say also another issue that we must talk about is the urbanization and the lifestyle in China versus India. So China, like in 2020, over 60% of the Chinese people lived in urban cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. And this means that the majority of the Chinese people are living in cities where there's advanced amenities, international business opportunities, and basically a cosmopolitan way of life. But if we look at India, around 65% of the population is still living in rural areas, which means that there's a huge gap in between people living in urban and rural areas in China and India. And while India is the is the number one country in the world with the most population, but I would say rural there's like millions of people who still live in rural areas where they're still struggling with infrastructure issues, traffic congestion, not really traffic congestion, that's mainly in the cities, but still infrastructure issues is still pervasive in India. And like in rural areas, there's still it's still not really developed compared to major cities like Mumbai, Delhi, or Bangalore. So I would say this urbanization is also one of the problems. And lastly, I would like to talk about some of the family structure. Like in China, the concept of collectivism is deeply ingrained in social life, influenced by the Confucian values and reinforced by the communist ideology. And family plays a central role in Chinese society. Previously, there was a one child policy, but nowadays China's actually basically incentivizing its citizens to have more and more children because the population took a dip. So I would say marriage and parenthood are strongly encouraged in both society, but I would say India is also more family oriented. But the problem with India is that I would say the problem with India is that there's a caste system which influence marital choices, and also there's like a huge brain drain in India where a lot of smart people, like if you look at the CEO of the Fortune 500 companies, majority of the CEOs are of Indian origin. Like let's look at Google, let's look at Microsoft. All of these CEOs are of Indian origins, where they're graduates from IIT and IIMs. So this clearly shows that there's a brain drain problem with India. But if the brain drain problem could be resolved, India would definitely be on track to compete with China.
Thank you, everyone, Mr. Mehta, Arif Malik, and Shazib Karim for your invaluable opinions. And now talking about a little bit about the strategic moves that India has done, which include the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI). China's BRI enhances its influence over global trade routes by financing infrastructure projects in Asia, Africa, and Europe, and by building ports, roads, and railways in partner countries. China ensures that its exports reach new markets while ensuring strategic control over key trade routes. And China is also a key player in the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the world's largest trading bloc, which includes ASEAN nations, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. And India opted out of RCEP due to concerns about Chinese goods flooding its market, a decision that may limit its access to regional markets dominated by India. And China is also capitalizing on the COVID-19 pandemic, India's reshuffling of global supply chains by enhancing its manufacturing capabilities and integrating with new technologies. And while some companies are diversifying production to countries like Vietnam and India, China remains a dominant player in global supply chains, especially in electronics, pharmaceuticals, and green energy industries. And as for India, India is trying to catch up to China by doing a lot of things, for such as the Make in India and PLI scheme, as Arif Malik and Mr. Hemeta and Mr. Shazil Karim have already mentioned. India's Make in India initiatives aims to increase the contributions of manufacturing to 25% of GDP by 2025, focusing on electronics, textiles, and pharmaceuticals. And the production link incentives PLI scheme was done by India, which has introduced financing incentives for domestic and foreign companies to set up manufacturing in India, particularly in sectors like electronics and solar energy. And India has been investing in improving its infrastructure with projects like the Sagarmala initiative, focused on modernizing ports, and Bharatmala initiative, which focused on developing road networks. And there's also a lot of enhanced logistics and digital infrastructure, which would improve India's competitiveness in exports. For example, India is also working to reduce its imports from China, particularly in key sectors like electronics and pharmaceuticals, by boosting domestic manufacturing. And policies aimed at promoting local industries and encouraging self-reliance under the Atmanirbhar Bharat self-reliant India campaign are in place. And India is also seeking to diversify its trade partnerships by renegotiating free trade agreements (FTAs) with countries like the UK, European Union, and Australia. And these trade deals aim to boost India's exports and reduce dependence on Chinese markets. So what do you think India can do to catch up to China, Mr. Mehta, Arif Malik, or Shazib Karim? Shazib, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Araf. I think you brought up a very interesting question of what India could do to catch up to China, and I think, in my opinion, India has enormous potential to catch up to China in terms of global economic influence and other stuff. But it faces several significant challenges that need to be addressed, and I think there are strategies and actions that India could take to close the gap with China. And I think one thing could be strengthening their infrastructure and logistics. Like India needs to continue investing heavily in improving its transportation, and infrastructure. Like the ongoing Bharatmala and Sagarmala projects, which focus on road and port development, need to be expanded and fast tracked to improve connectivity and reduce logistics costs. Modern high-speed rail networks and dedicated freight corridors should also be extended to streamline the movement of goods. And India must work towards integrating its various transportation networks, roads, rails, ports, and air, into a seamless intermodal system and multi-modal logistic parks that connect different transport models that could help reduce costs and improve efficiency. And another thing is like, they could India could maybe strengthen their green energy infrastructure. Like as we mentioned before, India is already making strides in solar power, but it needs to further expand its capacity to meet its ambitious renewable energy goals. By fast tracking the development of solar farms, wind farms, and hybrid projects, India can reduce its reliance on fossil fuels and increase energy security. And one of the key challenges with renewable energy is the intermittent nature of solar and wind power. India should invest in developing advanced energy storage systems such as lithium ion batteries, pumped hydro storage, and green hydrogen technology to ensure a reliable and continuous power supply from renewables. And I believe that India has the potential to become a global leader in green hydrogen production, especially given its growing in renewable energy capacity. Hydrogen can serve as a key component of India's long-term decarbonization strategy and reduce reliance on traditional energy source. And I think I think personally, they could also take some geopolitical strategies and trade partnerships, as India can use its geopolitical position to develop stronger trade ties with countries that are looking to reduce dependence on China. Partnerships with the US, Japan, and European nations can bring investments and technological transfers that accelerate India's industrial and technological growth. And India should play a greater role in regional trade agreements, particularly in South Asia and Southeast Asia, to create alternative supply chains and become a manufacturing hub for the region. Becoming more involved in initiatives like the Quad, like India, US, Japan, and Australia, like this can also strengthen economic ties and bring foreign investment. And India needs to negotiate free trade agreements that open up access to key markets for Indian goods and services. Bilateral and multilateral deals with countries in Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia can help diversify India's trade partnerships and reduce its reliance on China.
I'm completely in line with Shazib's suggestion. India should also actively pursue trade agreements with key economies in order to reduce tariffs and improve market access for Indian products. This includes engaging in regional trade agreements such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the RCEP. India should also encourage exports to a wider range of countries to reduce reliance on specific markets such as China, help mitigate risks associated with the global trade disruptions. It should also provide incentives and support services for exporters, including assistance, market intelligence, and logistical support. Initiatives like the Merchandise Exports from India scheme can be expanded. India should also encourage partnerships between industries and academic institutions to drive research, innovation, and commercialization of new techniques. India should also work on embracing digital transformation. It should leverage the Digital India initiative to enhance digital infrastructure, promote e-governance, and enable business to adopt digital technologies. Also, India needs to strengthen its regulatory framework and its policies. It should continue to improve the ease of doing business by simplifying regulations, reducing the multiple bureaucratic hurdles, and ensure the timely approval for infrastructure projects. It should implement a single window clearance system for businesses to facilitate smoother project approvals and reduce delays. It should also further liberalize the FDI norms in order to increase the investment in India in critical sectors like defense, telecommunication, and insurance. In such sectors, companies are only permitted to hold up to 25 or 50% of the stock. This should be increased to 75% in order to increase the partnership and investment. It should also provide incentives for companies that establish manufacturing facilities in India, except Make in India and the PLI. uh, India should also focus on investing in its human capital, just like China. It should focus on emphasis on STEM fields to develop a skilled workforce, and it should expand vocational training programs to equip the workforce with practical skills that meet industry demands. Also, there should be creative incentives for Indian professionals who have studied or worked abroad to return and contribute to the local economy, tapping into their skills and into their networks. And as Shahjav has said, India should enhance its global strategic partnerships. It should focus on strategic partnerships with countries such as US, Japan, and Australia to enhance economic cooperation, technological transfer, and security ties, and actively engage in reshaping the global supply chains to position itself as a reliable partner for international companies looking to diversify their manufacturing bases.
All right, Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, I would. See, yeah, I would agree with Shazib and him, and also like to say that yeah, there really isn't one thing that India can do to catch up with China. It's like a multitude of things that India needs to do in order to catch up. So, firstly, I would say they have to it's a must. I would say they have to invest in infrastructure development and the education system, basically the social aspects, because India is like, for example, and let's look at China's high speed rail network, and which is over 40,000 kilometers, and it's world class ports like Shanghai and Shenzhen. India, on the other hand, has congested ports, unreliable power supply, and like higher cost of production and delays. And I would say India needs to increase its manufacturing investment substantially as well. For example, they could undertake more public-private partnerships in order to do these infrastructure projects. And also, I would say, other than that, and education, of course, because we have to understand, like, India has really good education. As you have mentioned, like IIT, it's probably harder there to get into IIT than to MIT, but IIT is only limited to like less IIT is limited to like less than a less than point, like even less than 0.001% of the population. Like only like very handful of people get selected into IIT. But India's government should also like emphasize more on the quality of education over the aggregate scale. They should also like focus on the secondary school programs that they have to make it to make sure that there's also other alternative paths that are also more desirable, so that people do not want, and so the whole workforce is not just composed of engineers. So that could definitely help. And I would also say the bureaucratic red tape. It's not just India. I would say a lot of South Asian countries have these bureaucratic red tape. And I'm like, although I must admit that India has made progress in improving its ease of doing business ranking. For example, it moved 63rd in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And even so, it still faces significant challenges in labor laws, land acquisitions, contract enforcement. But China has been able to streamline those processes, which makes it easier for businesses to scale operations. And I would say India needs to amplify its its regulatory environment and reduce these bureaucratic hurdles that not only cost more for businesses but also delay the time as well. And reforms in these areas would definitely encompass the whole nation, and it's very hard to do because India is such a big country. There's a lot of people, and like it is very hard to get rid of the bureaucratic red tape. But if they can start from someplace small, like tech hubs like Bangalore, which they're already doing, so like they could start from there and like expand on, which would make the businesses more desirable to come to India. And yeah, basically that's it. And other than that, I would say in conclusion, I would say reducing the bureaucratic inefficiencies, expanding uh, trade alliances, expanding infrastructure and social aspects would be the key factors that would help India catch up to China.
Thank you, Arif Malik, Mr. Mehta, and Shazib Karim for all the invaluable opinions. Based on our discussion, I think that the conclusion that we can draw is that there is a wide trade gap, that's trade deficit that India is facing with China reflects its challenges in both competing with China's dominance in both regional and global markets. And India faces structural barriers such as high logistical costs, fragmented manufacturing, and a slow bureaucracy which impedes its ability to match China's trade efficiency. And while China struggles to compete directly with India, it has opportunities to leverage its advantages in sectors like IT services, pharmaceuticals, and renewable energy, and strengthening domestic manufacturing and enhancing export competitiveness through reforms and infrastructure development will be key for India to close the gap with China. And India's strategic positioning in global geopolitics, especially its closer ties with the US and Western countries, present opportunities to counterbalance China's trade dominance. However, with significant reforms and greater focus on improving manufacturing and trade efficiency, India will continue to face an uphill battle against China's trade supremacy. So, is that a conclusion that everyone agrees with, Mr. Mehta, Arif Malik, and Shazib Karim?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yes, I would agree that India's journey to catch up with China in terms of trade dominance and economic prowess is a complex and multifaceted challenge. While China has leveraged its state led capitalism, aggressive investments, and global partnerships to dominate international trade, India is still in the process of building a robust foundation. However, India is not without its strength. The Make in India initiative, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and the production-linked incentive scheme demonstrate the country's intent to transform into a global manufacturing hub. India's potential in sectors such as technology, services, and green energy are promising areas that would help close the gap. Ultimately, while the path forward is filled with challenges, India's dynamic and youthful economic coupled with strong government initiative does give it a fighting chance. It's not about replicating China's model, but finding a uniquely Indian strategy to carve out a larger role in global trade and influence. And this economic rivalry will continue to shape not only Asia, but the global landscape in the years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta, for your very detailed analysis of our conclusion, and also thank you, Mr. Arif Malik and Shazib Karim, for your arguments. And I think that brings us to the end of our discussion today, episode 27, China's trade dominance, India's struggle in a losing battle with Mr. Mehta. Mr. Mehta, is there anything that you would like to add before we depart for today?
No, that would be it.
Are there any final words? How did you find the podcast, Mr. Mehta?
Yeah, the podcast is amazing. All of the speakers are clearly very informed and have really done their research. A lot of the points were brought out, good, compelling arguments, and talks were made. And I would really appreciate Ara for giving me this opportunity to place my points and interact with such highly intellectual people.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. We really appreciate your comments. And thank you to the audience for listening to this podcast, which was episode 27, China's trade dominance, India struggling in a losing battle with Mr. Mehta. Thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast. And we hope to see you next week with another very interesting topic, with another very interesting guest speaker. Thank you and goodbye for now.